Okay, so I think some of you know me. I'm Phuong Fay, and on the screen you'll see that that's my real name, my full name, and I'll give anyone $100 if they can pronounce that is not related to me. So, but it's actually pronounced Phuong Fay. And thankfully, my husband has 3 letters in his name because I just added it. But that's important to note too, because in a lot of cultures, the women don't change their last name. They keep their maiden name, and then the children take on the father's last name. So I went through 4 name changes before I settled on this one, which was kind of emotional for me because my grandmother in Vietnam, my maternal grandmother, for a while she didn't speak to me because she was really upset because I had changed it completely. And then I changed it back, and then I hyphenated and all this other stuff. And she said, "It's been 300 years. What's wrong with you?" So, but anyway. Okay. I just wanted to let you know this picture is actually from 1975. That was our first Christmas here in America. Eric and I moved to Columbus, if you all didn't know, but we moved here about 20 years ago. We took about 3 years and moved to Tennessee again to be with near family, but we came back again because we love it so much here. So, and we love our church family. So we have 2 children, Isabel and Amelia, who are here. And they are both in high school now, but they both went through St. Bartholomew School. So we are very thankful. Okay, so imagine yourself, it's April 30th, 1975, well after midnight. So it's pitch dark in the jungle, and there's a war going on. And I know for a lot of people that's hard to imagine. For some of the older folks who maybe are veterans, you can probably imagine. Or if you've seen pictures, it's interesting to say this because I tell this story because I think it needs to be heard. And I was telling Father at the beginning of this that I've never actually told this story from end to end to anyone that's not really close to me. So just bear with me. I've got tissues, so I may not make it all the way through. And when I get nervous or when I'm tired, I get really southern. So y'all might hear some drawing coming out. So just be prepared. This is a map of Vietnam. As you can see, the purple parts are North Vietnam, and the southern parts that are green, South Vietnam. And that's where my family is from. And the South Vietnamese were partnered with the U.S. military. So we fought as allies. And in the northern part, which would be communist, they fought with China and Japanese as well. You can go back and study the history yourself, but it's some people it's boring. For me, it was kind of boring, but then when I read it again, I thought it was really interesting. We start off in Phuong Fay, which is down here. Now, there's going to be a better map, but it's right down at the very bottom where the Mekong Delta is. And then we'll end up in America eventually, but here we go. So Phuong Fay is actually where my father was stationed. He was in the South Vietnamese Navy, but he worked very closely with the U.S. Navy. And our boat left. It was a little river boat, and I don't know for any of you boat folks, but it would be just like basically a boat that could have maybe 25 capacity, 25, 30 people. They piled about 150 people on this boat. So there was nowhere to sit. You literally were on top of each other. So we left from Phuong Fay, which is a little ways in. The red circle, that's Phuong Fay, where my dad was stationed. It's about roughly 60 kilometers from Ho Chi Minh City, which most people, they're Southern Vietnamese. They don't really refer to it as Ho Chi Minh City. They refer to it still as Saigon. So my dad had a friend in the U.S. military. He basically told him one day, he said, "It's time to go." My dad wasn't sure what that meant. He said, "Just know that you need to be ready in the next few days." This was the 27th of April. He said, "When you leave, don't pretend like you're not going away for very long. Leave everything as is. Don't take any clothing. Don't take suitcases. Just take whatever you have, anything that you value the most." And of course, for my dad, that was his children and his. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother, we call her Bouai. Bouai is Vietnamese for maternal grandmother, so that's why we call her that. But she had taken my youngest aunt and uncle. They had been living with my mom and dad for a little over a year and a half. And there's roughly 15 years 15 and 12 years respectively between my mom and my younger aunt and uncle. She was one of 10 children. My grandmother took them back to Saigon along with 2 of her grandchildren. And she took them back because things were getting really heated and she wanted them to be safe and near their mom, who was living in the city. And she wanted to take my oldest brother with her. So there's a little bit of information is that I hear the story from so many people. Hear it from relatives, friends, anyone who's ever experienced it. It's interesting because I always think of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, right? A lot of the stories are the same, different perspectives. And I relate that very much to that type of experience where I hear a little bit, but it might be different from someone else. So my grandmother tried to take my brother, and my mother said, no, he's got to stay with me. So and she begged, had he gone with my grandmother, he probably wouldn't be with us. But as fate would have it, he stayed with us. He was 3.5 years old. That put me at close to 1 and my other brother at 2.5. So we were all about a year and a half apart. As with most refugees during that time, we left from Kanka and we went by boat. That was the majority of the refugees, or the evacuees, we call them, from Kanka by boat. But the plan was never to leave. The plan was to go into hiding. My dad was with the Navy, and they said, you really need to get away from the city. Go hide for a while, go hide for a few days, a few weeks. When things calm down, you can come back. So that was the plan. So the little ferry boat took us out, and we went upriver, or downriver, I'm sorry. And it was a very, very dark night. So you can imagine in the jungle, there's not a whole lot you can see, and you're trying to not get, you're trying to evade capture, right? So, the ferry boat actually ran aground, which was really unfortunate because they couldn't figure out a way to get out. So somebody radioed, and one of the larger sort of river boats came upriver through the that delta area. So we switched boats first time. So there's 4 boats involved in this whole process, but we went to the second boat, and it was not much bigger. So you've still got 150, almost 200 people, close to like 175 is what my dad thought. So anyway, we came upriver and we got to the delta area. From there, we went onto a larger boat. Dad said it was an LSM R5406, which it's amazing to me the details that he can remember, but he remembers them very clearly. And I looked it up. It's like a ferry boat. So like when you get on vacation, like back in an island, if anybody's been there, it's just like a ferry boat that goes across from island to mainland. So we took one of those, and it ended up in this place called Drukya, and just north of. So we came out of there and went on the ferry boat, and it ferried us around the. There's an island over here called Tongsung Island, also known as Gongdao, which is a tiny little island. And that's where we sort of ended up. We didn't end up on the island, but Dad had said about maybe like 2 or 3 miles offshore, because you didn't want to land there because that was a bad place to land. But it was a good place to switch ships again. So what happened was, this is the part that always gets me. Like I can't get through it. But it was very dangerous because you have 2 ships and you're in the middle of the ocean in the South China Sea. And obviously it's about this time, Dad said it was sunrise. So you got a little bit of light, but lots of shooting, air, missiles going everywhere, people in chaos, just other boats in the area. And they had to switch over. But when you did, there was no plank, there was nothing to tie you to, nothing to tie the ships to. So you really had to time the swells. So if the boats came together at the swells, that's when you jumped. So we're talking so many babies just got dropped in the ocean. And my mom was really, really upset because she said, I am not going to lose my children. And I can't even imagine. And just remember, I'm not even a year old, so I can't even remember this, but I can. And it was 46 years ago. Sorry. But she took her outer garment off and she ripped it into strips. She tied it together and made a rope. So she tied my body to her body. And a lot of people started doing this. They saw, oh, I can do that. So they started ripping their clothes up, taking them off. So she tied me to her, And that way she'd have her hands free so that my dad could go across, and then my two brothers, who were at the time 2 and 3, so they had to help them across. So mom would have 2 hands to do that with. So we all made it, and it's actually it's really not rare, but it's not common at all for families to lose family members along the way. So we all made it. Now we're outside of Phuong Fay Island. Okay, from Phuong Fay Island, we went to the Philippines. And after that transfer in the Bay, we headed directly west. And that journey took about 10 days. Oh, and I forgot to tell you, the journey to, oh no, I'm sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself. So the journey to the Philippines from Phuong Fay Island was, it was horrible. Like just basically the way my parents described it is it took about 10 days. There was one little rice bowl. It was more like rice water. They'd cook it down and it'd just be like a mucky. I mean, people have cooked rice before. It's that cloudy white water. That's what you got for your whole family, a bowl of it for 10 days. There was nowhere to sleep. So you just held each other, kind of slept on each other. There was no bathroom, no beds. So for 10 days, you basically just sat where you were and you had to go to the bathroom. You just did. So we went from Phuong Fay Island to the Philippines. In the Philippines, we took the Philippines was actually considered, I don't know if anyone's ever heard of a first asylum country. So a lot of countries in Southeast Asia at the time, they were willing to take us for a short period of time in order to go on to the next place. So countries like the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, Hong Kong, even Indonesia, those were countries of first asylum. So we were allowed to stay there just to get supplies, get on another ship, ship number 4. But at least this one was actually a cargo ship. It was very large, and there was actually a place to lie down. But when I mean lie down, it was the metal ship. So there's enough space for you to actually lay down. Or they had supply racks, and they usually let the children sleep in the supply racks. So no blankets, nothing. They ate sea ration. I don't know if anybody knows what a sea ration is, but I would encourage you to Google sea ration. They are disgusting. They are so disgusting. I mean, I can't even begin to imagine. Anyway, maybe Deacon Bill, you remember what a sea ration is? So that's what they had to eat. That journey took about 2 weeks, but they did have restrooms. Not very many, but they had restrooms. What my dad. So from there, we went on to the Philippines. To Guam. We were in Guam for about 6 weeks. There you actually awaited refugee status. They called us refugees, but my dad said it was more like the term was parolee or evacuee. I always thought parolees were criminals that got let out of prison, but apparently that's not the case. You could be a person without a country and you were a parolee. So essentially you were without a country because international refugee law does not give you a status. So we were in the Philippines in order to see if some other country would take us as refugees. So, and I'll explain that in a little bit. The countries that were actually taking refugees at the time were obviously the United States, Canada, Australia, France, and France is a no-brainer. I don't know if you all know, but Vietnam was colonized by France for well over 100 years. So, West Germany, Italy. Have you ever heard an Italian person speak Vietnamese? I've only ever heard it one time. It's very interesting, but they probably say that about me too. So, and the UK, United Kingdom, was also accepting refugees from Vietnam and Cambodia, Laos, Thailand. There were a lot of refugees during the time. It wasn't just Vietnamese. It was in Guam that my parents, though, finally realized. They finally realized that, and it was really heart-wrenching because I don't think they realized, I know they didn't know where they were going or why they were leaving or being taken to these other countries. but the realization that they wouldn't be going home. My mom said it was just, she said she was so depressed because she had 9 brothers and sisters, and her parents were there. Everything you've ever known. I can tell you right now, refugees don't want to leave their home. That's not their first choice. It's a last resort. So I really applaud them for all that they've ever done. The pictures you see it's the evacuee process in Guam, and what you're seeing in that black and white picture, it's called Tent City. So that was literally what my dad said. That's what it looked like. Early on, they were thinking it was only about 14,000 refugees. I think over 150,000 refugees went through there before it was over with. So, and then, of course, it was called Operation New Life. Everything in the military has an operation, if you guys know that. Eric's a Navy veteran, so we're a big Navy family. April through November of 1975 was when Guam was, and Guam today is even a U.S. territory. It still remains a territory of the United States. I'm actually very closely related to this little boy in the picture. It's my brother. He is my oldest brother, and that poor woman was desperate to adopt him. And at first, when my mother has told me this story, I laughed and I thought it was funny. And she said, "Don't laugh." And I said, "Why?" She said, "Because she was serious. She didn't think we could feed him." And we had 3. She said, "You have 3 children. Just give me that one." And so she was serious. And I think they would have, they would have taken him if my mom had agreed to it. So she used to ask him to go get things, supplies or whatever it was literally across the street from our tent. And the lady would come over and start walking away with him, I'm just going to take him for a walk. And my mom said, no. So after that first few days, she didn't let my brother out of her sight. And he is kind of cute, isn't he? So, So from the Philippines, this is actually the refugee camp in Pennsylvania. I'm sorry, I didn't mention that, but Fort Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania, which is still there. It serves as the Pennsylvania Army National Guard home base now. So it's still an active Army base. There were 3 other places in the country that were accepting refugees. So Fort Pendleton is in California. There was an Army base in Arkansas, which I had a lot of friends from, interestingly enough, and Florida, so at Eglin Air Force Base. Okay. The refugee camps actually were designed so that you would only stay there for a little while. We were there for 2 months, but I don't know if you've read about Syria and those places. Sometimes people stay there for a whole lifetime. There are kids that grow up in a refugee camp. So we were really lucky. Catholic Charities and the Presbytery Church USA in Jackson actually sponsored our family. Okay. The man in the picture is actually my father. He was in the Southern Vietnamese Navy, but he worked very closely with the U.S. Navy SEALs because at the time the Navy SEALs they'd never really seen guerrilla warfare. Does everybody know what guerrilla warfare is? It's basically no rules. You're in a jungle. Survival is your only objective. So Dad knew the lay of the land. He was in the Navy. He actually trained a lot of Navy SEAL units. So that alone could have gotten him killed. Or that alone was one reason that he had to leave. The CIA recruited him shortly after he was training the SEALs. So he would do a lot of missions. He would be gone for weeks or months at a time. So that's another reason why he knew there wasn't any hope for him to stay. The next bit here is actually a video that I really, really thought was interesting. And interestingly enough, I have a really good friend who's an immigration attorney down in Houston. And she actually knows of this family. And I was telling her about the video and she said, "Oh, what's her name?" And I thought, oh, that's interesting. But I'm going to share it with you. If I can figure out how to make it bigger. Sorry. I have to put my glasses on and take them off. Okay, there we go. On in 1975, million desperate many of them refugees, people. Now, a Vietnamese born Phuong was one of them. Accomplished so much in the 4 decades. One goal remains finding and thanking the men who rescued John Taylor from maritime.
What made you take this inward? How to find these?
At every big juncture of graduation, law school, children, being like, in the back of my head,
just keep going.
I have to find.
Lauren Phuong carried that passion for decades to express her gratitude to those who saved her life.
My very courageous, fearless mother of mine.
And she wasn't alone.
I would ask my mom periodically, do you ever think about them? And she would say, every time I have something good to eat, I think of them.
Wow.
When we first arrived in America, my first thought was, how could I find the people who saved us?
All these years later, and it's still that important to you.
That's my dream.
Phuong never gave up her mother's dream. Her parents, upper-class landowners in the South, faced terrible persecution once the victorious North Vietnamese took control. Under communist rule, Phuong's father was taken to a Viet Cong re-education camp.
When we saw our husband, working with one ball, and that's when we got to get out. I had to get him out.
Then he would die.
For sure, 100%.
And that led
Part of that. Guys, you can't see the video on the
business.
not what I wanted to show you.
led to a daring decision to give her entire.
Okay, I'm gonna unshare and then reshare. I bet Did they say they could hear it though? Sure.
Yeah.
After the fall of Saigon in 1975, more than 1 million deaths arrived in America. Can you see it on the video?
Yeah. All these later, still very important. Phuong never gave up her mother's dream. Her parents, upper-class landowners, faced persecution once the North Vietnamese control. Under communist rule, Phuong's father It called re-education.
When we saw our, you know, working and with the like the one phone, that's when I really got time to get it
God.
to 100%.
And that led to a daring decision to get their family to the country with dozens of other families. They crammed onto a fishing vessel and set out to the open sea. Only 7 years old.
We're just so much. Didn't think there was left.
Living in
They're living for how long? For the don't 7-year-old really knows what death is. I didn't see how we keep doing and feeling the things that we were feeling.
but somehow they endured. About 120 ships were on the same route, but never slowed. Then on June 29, 1980, they watched with awe as one paused and approached a liquefied natural gas tank called the Virgo. There was Dan Hansen and Ken Nelson, the first two men Phuong remembers seeing. There was no way that we go away. I thought that would have been quickly condemning them to.
The two men came on, and then next thing I know, my mom was laughing, she was crying, all at the same time. She says to me, "We're going to live, we're going to live."
Saved your family at that point. You knew your family.
Yes.
The rescue meant not just survival, but set Phuong's family on a path full of promise here in America. 27 years ago, Lauren began her journey to find these men. Searched maritime registry, scoured the internet, led to conversations with officers, photographs, eventually an emotional reunion. Hello, are you? This, the first time they'd seen each other, 37 years.
It was your words, the captain. That saved us. Dan stood on the gateway, stood on our boat. They had to lift each child, tie the swells, and then hand the child over. And so I said to them, I was delivered by you. Yeah, it was. I still feel like this is all a dream.
Phuong got to share that special day with parents, siblings, husband, children. Do you feel more American? Still feel? Or is there distinction?
I'll never not leave you. That's my heritage. I can't help being American because it's my country. And when I see that hyphen, Vietnamese American, I don't see it as a dividing factor. I see it as a bridge. That hyphen is a bridge. Where I was, who I was, with who I am now, where I am today.
A bridge that owes its existence to a boat and its crew did the most American things, racing the huddled masses, turning to. For CBS This Morning Saturday, Dave. What a story.
I mean, the beacon of America. I'm so brightly in the minds of others who have. I mean, my family had a story like that. So countless numbers of stories. America really welcoming. Okay. Can everyone see my screen again on Zoom? Yeah. Can you see it now? No. Yeah. That should work. Sorry, guys. Okay. So we were talking about refugees. This is a very, I'll keep it as short as possible, but I think it's extremely important to learn this. A lot of people confuse the terms refugee, asylee, and immigrant. And I called my friend who's the immigration attorney for the last 30 years, so I think I have the right answer. I tried to make sure it was completely factual. So a refugee, according to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, is a person who flees a foreign country of power to escape danger or persecution. So obviously it's somebody who is in imminent danger, like ourselves, and there's no other option for you. You have to leave or you will be killed or taken prisoner. An asylee is someone who is seeking asylum or who has been granted asylum. That may not seem like a lot of difference as far as like your terms, it's not. It's somebody who's escaping political, religious, physical harm. The difference between the two is that an asylee is already here in the country that they want to seek asylum in. Like you're physically on the ground where you want to be, or you're at a port of entry. So a lot of Canadians, if they want to come in, they can do that. Or obviously a lot of the folks south of the United States, so Central America, those would be asylum seekers because they're actually trying to come in and they're already at the border. A refugee is not in the country they're seeking refuge in, they're elsewhere and they're trying to do it through other channels. So when you hear somebody say, I'm an immigrant is not necessarily a refugee. An immigrant is a person who comes in the country to take up permanent residence for a purpose. Students are immigrants. They come in and they want to work, they want to immigrate here. Or Cummins is a great example. Cummins or any of the other companies around here that sponsor a lot of folks to immigrate here and work here. So, and immigrants don't necessarily have to be citizens. An immigrant may just be a permanent resident that can work here for 3 or 4 or 6 years and typically go home. So a refugee can be both a refugee and an immigrant. An asylee or asylum seeker can be both an asylee and an immigrant. However, an immigrant is not necessarily a refugee nor an asylee. Pretty simple, but not a lot of people know that. So talking about permanent residency, this is what a modern green card looks like. And if you've ever wondered why they call it a green card, it's literally because they've always been green from day one. They've always had some sort of shade of green or green lettering or something like that. So now they're a lot more fancy and they're double-sided and they look like it's a plastic card like your driver's license. Before they were paper. Within your first year, you can actually obtain a work permit or a work card, and that work card can be renewed annually for up to 3 or 4 years. And what's interesting that a lot of people also don't know is when you get a work permit, you also get a social security number. Some people think, oh, you have to get a green card before you can get the social security number, or you have to be a citizen to get the social security number. You're actually issued a social security number because you have the work card, or you get the work card, you get the social security number. Because if you think about it, when you go get a job, what do they ask you for? Your name and your what? Social security number. So a permanent resident card, the green card, as I said, you can start applying for that within, like after your first year of being in country. In 1911, on the left-hand side, that's what a green card looked like. And no, I don't know these people. That was from Poland. My green card looked like that one on the right. And it does, you can't tell in this picture because it's kind of yellow, but that was actually green. And if you haven't noticed, it says resident alien. They didn't think that was very nice, so they changed it to permanent resident. So, but used to be referred to as a resident alien. Okay, so talking about my parents, they definitely had a lot they left behind. The folks in these pictures, the lady over there on the picture under 1954, that's my mom over there, the second in from, so she would have been about 6. She doesn't have very many pictures at all. My dad doesn't have any at all. My dad actually lost his mother when he was 13. He lost his father earlier at 7. And he had a younger sister that's 7 years younger than him. So, and there's no fostering system. There's no orphanage during a war. You just get left. So at 7, he was already taking care of his mom because she had tuberculosis. And then at 13, he lost her and was taking care of his younger sister. So he didn't have a very easy life. My mom was one of 10, obviously. When you have your younger siblings that are easily 15, 16 years younger than you, you become a parent too in those conditions. You don't get to be a kid. So she definitely was taking care of her younger siblings as well. And the folks on the right, that is actually my cousin and my aunt. So you see, they grew up as siblings. And I love the fact that Vietnamese culture, there's actually no word for cousin. You're all brothers and sisters. So your third cousin, your fourth cousin, that's your brother or your sister. You all kind of live in the same village and you're all together. There's no privacy. So, but that's just the culture, and it's a really lovely, and obviously it can be very tense at times, but it can be tense at times, but I love the stories that my mom and dad have told me about the experiences they've had with family. This other picture is 1958, so my mom would have been about 10 years old. She's the one on the far right, or far left, your left, my right. So far left, and those are 5 of her siblings. So she's the second of 10. So the other older girl is her older sister, her only older sister. But these are the few things that she actually got away with. Like she left, and she just grabs a couple of pictures and literally had the clothes on her back, and that was it. So talking about coming to America, roughly 1.6 million Vietnamese people have actually resettled in America, and about 800,000 of them were boat people. But the statistic that comes next is what shocks me. Only 1 in 2 survived. The rest either died, got captured, or were lost at sea. So I can't imagine, you don't choose to be a refugee, you just don't. That's just not something you want to do. Our family was actually sponsored. Catholic Charities has done an amazing job with all the organizations in every community. I wonder how in the world, but I know it's through faith. I know through a lot of people's effort that this happened. This was our very first church directory picture on the right. So I think just about every Catholic church does them, every church really. So that's me, obviously. And then that's also me. And that would have been shortly after we got here, because I was a year old when we came here. So Father Chris had this amazing homily Sunday this past weekend. I don't know if anybody heard it or was listening, but I was listening, Father Chris. This is one of my favorite verses that my grandmother has always taught me, the Matthew 25:35. When you're hungry, get fed. When you're thirsty, someone gives you something to drink, and you're a stranger and you get welcomed in. So my grandparents, and I say that because the man in the picture, you can only see his back, and the woman standing next to him there on the left, those were my sort of surrogate grandparents. They were members of the Presbyterian Church that sponsored our family. And they were Joe and Rebecca Davis, but they were a grandmother and granddaddy to me. Those are the grandparents I've only known. So I've met my maternal grandparents, but I don't really know them. I have a relationship with my maternal grandmother, but not the way that I have with Rebecca Davis. She has since passed. She passed about 15, 16 years ago. Granddaddy is still here. He's in Nashville, Tennessee. But they are the epitome of Christ in human. My granddad was actually on the Buildings and Grounds Committee. He was going to go to a Buildings and Grounds Committee meeting, and he wandered into this refugee meeting one night. he said, oh, I thought it was interesting, so I stayed. And little did he know that he was going to end up volunteering to pick us up at the airport. So he picked us up, family of 5. He said that he could never have prepared himself for the pitiful, pitiful sight that he was about to see. So we had a 1971 pickup truck, or he did. It was new to him at the time. And that's what we rode home in. Of course, it was seatbelts or whatever. But we ended up in Memphis, because Jackson's about an hour east of Memphis. And so that's where he picked us up. But we all piled in. And from that day on, my mom said, it was interesting because I allowed him to hold me. And I didn't really allow many people to hold me at all. In fact, I preferred my mom over my dad because my dad was gone a lot during the war. And Mom said that when I was born, he wasn't actually there. He was on a mission. And a couple months later, he came back to the village, and he was limping, and he was disfigured, and he was dirty, and barely, surviving. And she said she didn't even recognize my dad. So I just know that, it was very hard for my dad because here I was his child, and I didn't really have a bond with him. But then my grandfather, who's this big Caucasian man, and I took to him very, very quickly. So, but the homily, I got off topic. You see the tables? I had so many tables in my head on Sunday. But these are 2 of the tables because our family quickly became a revolving door. We were one of the first refugees. And so my parents, because the church sponsored our family, they taught us, taught my parents how to drive. They taught them how to speak English. They taught them how to open a bank account, get their first jobs. My dad even turned down, and I know there's a place for government assistance, but my dad's a very proud man, and he would not accept any at all. In fact, he turned it all down. He said, I don't want it. He said, let me try to do it on my own first. So he got a full-time job as a mechanic, and he also got several part-time jobs to support our family because he didn't want my mom to have to work because we had 3 young children now. But after that, we started finding people on our front porch. They were just refugees, Vietnamese and Cambodian, Laotian refugees who needed help. And they had heard through the grapevine that there was a Vietnamese family in West Tennessee. And they came as far as, 60, 70, 80 miles because they had no one else to talk to, or there was very little. I mean, you can imagine 1975 in West Tennessee, there aren't Vietnamese speakers that know English also. My dad was actually one of the very few because he had worked with the U.S. Navy. And they taught him. So in the early years, the little baby on the table, and then the picture above it, I just had to put it in there because I was not very nice to my brother. I actually poked him with the fork, which is why he's screaming. So I got the fork taken away from me, by the way. I was told that. Yeah. The other picture is interesting because do you see what my mom is doing there on the floor inside the house? She's cleaning fish. Yeah. So it's a cultural thing. In Vietnam, your floors were dirt. And my mom put newspaper down and she just, cut it all up and there you go. And we all hung out and watched. Yeah. I know. I think it's gross, but it was, and everybody's always on the floor. Another table that I cannot find a picture of is the floor with the tablecloth. They would just clear out everything and have a tablecloth on the floor. We would all eat on the floor, which is very common. So again, it takes a village. The church that sponsored our family, so the gentleman that is in front of me, this was actually in college, by the way, 1993, and this was his oldest son's wedding. But we became very close to this family. My grandmother, Rebecca, she was the Easter Bunny, Cupid, St. Patty, all rolled in every holiday. There was a big tray of cookies or whatnot sitting outside the back door. She wanted to make sure that we had every experience possible, that we kids would not miss out on anything. So I can even remember sitting on the front porch every Sunday morning waiting for grandmother to come by in her little green car and pick us up for Sunday school. And then my parents would join us later, but she wanted us to go to Sunday school every morning. Just wait for her. The lady here in the brown on the other end, that's Rebecca. 2 people in the middle, that was my pediatrician and his wife. So we were very close to them as well. And I can remember going to college and saying, I don't really want to go to another doctor. But he made me, so it was time. I was 18. And the lady above them is a very good friend of my grandparents, who passed away this spring from COVID. But her name was Miss Fluff. We called her Miss Fluff because she had big white hair. She had it pulled back that day. But her name was Juanita Eller. And she also was she was such a sweet lady, and my grandparents, and just, it's kind of just an example of all the people in your life that come in. And I think Kai had talked about that last month. There's just these people that come in your life, and whether or not a refugee still has contact with the people that help them, I can tell you that they are grateful. They are grateful beyond measure, because I know I am. On to naturalization. I even brought mine, but please don't take it out of the cellophane. I was going to pass it around. It's very valuable to me in a lot of ways, because if I lose it, I don't actually have a birth certificate. This is the only record of my birth. So, because I was born during the war in the hospital. I actually was born in the hospital, which is rare too. Because my father was in the military, they allowed my mother to be in the hospital. They blew it up the week after we left. So it was leveled along with everybody else in it. So, which is horrible to think about, but it happened. Citizenship is actually something that you can attain 5 years after you've been in the country. So that's the law. But what I didn't know is you don't have to physically be here for any of it but 2.5 years. So you can be gone for like 6 months to work somewhere else and then back again, but you have to have 2.5 consecutive years of being here, and then you can apply. And if you didn't know, if you were a spouse of a U.S. citizen, you only have to wait for 2 years and 3 months, which roughly they say is 3 years, and apply for citizenship or go through the naturalization process. Any minor under the age of 18 automatically becomes a citizen when one of their parents becomes a citizen, which is what happened to us. I don't know why. I asked my parents, why did you guys wait? Because I was 15 years old. So they waited 13 years before they did. And I never knew it until a couple of weeks ago. I asked my parents, and I said, why did you guys wait so long? Because I just thought, you waited, you could have done this 7 years before. And I think the reason why, one of the reasons was because my brother was about to turn 18. He was a senior. Yeah, we were sophomore, junior, senior, boom, boom, boom. But my mother broke down and she said, I really thought we were going to go home. So can you imagine after that many years? And she said home. She didn't mean home here. She meant home in Vietnam. Her mom, her brothers, her sisters, everybody was still there. She had held on to that little bit of hope. So again, I hesitate to make judgment on anybody. And I will be the one to tell you, I'm opposed to immigration. I know that sounds crazy, being an immigrant myself. And you may all, I get the judgy eyes from other people all the time. And, honestly, it may not be the judgy. It might just be the confusion that why would you be in opposition to immigration? I'm in opposition because my pipe dream is for everyone's country to be like our country. If it was like our country, no one would want to leave their country. So I just caution everyone to be careful when they think in their heads, oh, well, why are they doing that? So, because I just know that everybody's journey is different. And it's difficult to say what you would do, because I was one of those people. I'm guilty of saying, why on earth would you send your kids without you? I encourage you all to go look up Operation Baby Lift. That was in the mid 70s. It was a mass exodus of babies, of orphans, parents giving up their children to go to America, to go to Australia, to go to France. And it's heart-wrenching to know that you would make that decision. But there were parents who felt like that was the only way their kids would survive and also would be safe. So anyway, so that's an example also for those online. I don't know that guy. But it hasn't changed very much. Mine looks a lot like that. An Italian man in the 30s. So that was his naturalization. So fast forward, I'm in college, and it's 1994. October 20th is my legal birthday. 20 years later, and I'm 20 years old. I went on a program called Semester at Sea. It circumnavigated the world on a ship. But one of the countries that it stopped at was literally the only reason why I applied for this program, was that it was going to Vietnam, because at the time, the United States did not have any sort of political or legal ties to Vietnam. In fact, we were still very, very not friends. It wasn't until the next year that the administration normalized ties and he could go back. So we were the first ship, we were the first American ship to re-enter after 20 years. And my grandparents were waiting at the port. It was an amazing day for me. That's the first time I'd ever met them. And I got to meet my family. And lucky for me, my parents taught me Vietnamese, so I'm fluent in Vietnamese. I was able to communicate with them, go home with them. I had to have special permission to stay with them, but these are my in-laws, the Fays, and those are my parents, the Wins. And I just wanted to show this picture because we adore our families. We are very close to our families. And I just can't imagine life without them. I can't imagine life without my grandparents, my American grandparents. They've given me something that you can't pay. Can't pay for it. So it's just something amazing that people would give their livelihoods to help you like that. Steve and Diane Goff-Bennett are not here. They were supposed to be, but I was giving them a hard time because they had another family event that they couldn't. But they're our family here. So we have a Hoosier family too. We met them at Coffee and Donuts the very first Sunday we were here, downtown, the church on 8th Street, 8th Avenue. And it was Diane, if anybody knows Diane, it was her that came to us, not Steve. Said, what are y'all doing? So, anyway, she was nosy because we were a young couple and she wanted to know what's going on. So anyway, from that day on, they became Aunt Diane and Uncle Steve, and to our kids too. We've left them for days. We've gone on vacation and left our kids with them. So I guess they're pretty trustworthy. I was going to stop it. Maybe I'll just. Okay, there. That way you don't have to look at my ugly little screen. But I wanted to ask you all, this is just one other story, but I had forgotten, but I want to tell it. I can remember as a kid, growing up in Jackson, Tennessee, we were the less than 1% Asian. The other two people were my brothers in school. So we were the three kids. And I can remember a time when my mom, we were at the grocery store. She had picked us up from school. We went to the grocery store. And I want you to think of a time when you're hungry. Feel like you're hungry. You say, oh, Mom, I'm starving. If you're a kid, think about your kids saying they're starving. I don't think we've ever known starvation, including myself. My parents worked so hard. I've never starved a day. I've always had clothes. They may not have been the nicest or the most designer. But definitely, I can remember being at the grocery store and my mom having to put groceries back because we just couldn't afford the groceries that she bought, and she just miscalculated. So we put back whatever. And it wasn't things like soda or candy or junk food. It was things like meat and vegetables because they were expensive. And we were the weird people, in the neighborhood. In the neighborhood, we had this huge garden in the back, and we lived in the city, which was really weird that we had the entire backyard was the garden. I mean, it had weird things in it. So you might think, oh, I have a garden, but I bet you didn't have bitter melon or know what bitter melon is. It's gross, by the way. No, I'm sorry. It's not gross. It's very hard to eat. It's bitter. But things like that, lemongrass. So, and so I just wanted to say that after all these years, 46 years, I feel like this story that I just told you all, to me, it's a dream. It's somebody else's reality because I was a year old and I didn't experience that, not the way my parents did. But for them to sacrifice what they did in order to bring us here, and for the people in the community to sacrifice what they did, my grandparents, and I can't remember one single memory over the last 46 years that my grandparents or Joe and Rebecca aren't a part of. Like, I still call my grandmother. Sometimes I'll forget and say, oh, how do I do this? And I'll call her. And I realized she's not there anymore. So, and it's tough, because it's just a really tough topic, I think, being a refugee or even being an asylee. So anyway, I just wanted to share. I've never done that before, so thank you for your time. And I know I went way, way over, Father. So are there any questions at all? I'm open to any questions online or, yeah, Father Chris. Okay, Father Chris, his question is, how did we decide to come to America? So first part, we didn't decide, and I should have told that story. When we were in Guam at the refugee camp there, they actually assign you to a country first. They give you a country of refuge. So we were assigned to the United States because my dad usually you take what you can get, right? You're desperate. But my dad said, if there's any way, I already speak the language, I know a little bit of the customs. He worked with the U.S. military, so they told him stories. He actually learned English by listening to the Beach Boys, which I think is kind of interesting because I listened to a lot of Beach Boys growing up, and I was not at all excited about the Beach Boys. So, but anyway, when he went to the office of assignment, you had to wait in line, and you had to, it took a lot of time, and the queue was long every day. And the interesting thing is that every day you had to get in the line, and if that day the office closed, you were done, you didn't get your space back in line. You had to get back in line the next day. So one day, something was going on at the refugee camp, and Dad saw that the line was empty, so he jumped right in and got in really quickly. Well, the result of that was I didn't get my right birthday. So, but I'll come to that in a minute. Father was asking about how we got to Tennessee. We actually were offered Boston, but as you can tell, my dad didn't want to go there because it's so cold. He had heard through the grapevine that there was a lot of snow and you wear a lot of clothes, and he didn't even know what a winter coat was. They didn't know what boots were. Like, that was just so foreign to them. So Dad said, I don't want to be that person, but if there's anything, no, there's another, you can go to Tennessee. He said, I'll take that. See, he showed him on the map where Tennessee was, and that's how we ended up. And the churches actually can say, the churches are the people, you could sponsor as individuals too, as a family. I knew people that were sponsored by a family, not just a group of people like a church. But they would tell you, we have enough room for 5 people. We have enough room for a family of 3 people. We can only take 1 person. Yeah, good question. Thank you. I'm going to tell you the quick story of my birthday. I'm actually not born on October 20th. I was born on August 20th. So, and I didn't find out until I was 28 years old, because my mom and my grandmother was given permission to come. She actually, interestingly enough, visitor visas are the #1 visas get turned down. I did not know that, because most people who get visitor visas, tourist visas, only want to come for a very short period of time. But the fear is, it's kind of like the rotten egg spoils it for the rest of them, But they come and then they stay, and they don't follow the rules. They don't go home after they're supposed to go home. So that's one of the ones that they're very critical about. But so she was not given a visa to come for our wedding, but she was given a visa to come to my brother's wedding several years later. And I took her to Washington, D.C., because I thought that would be really cool to take my grandmother to Washington, D.C. And it was a hot day in August, and she said, oh, it was such a hot day, just like this when you were born. I said, excuse me, because I know the weather there is not hot at the end of October. It's cool. I mean, it's very tropical, but it's not blazing hot. And it's monsoon season, so it's a little bit cooler. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, in August when you were born. I wasn't born in August, grandmother. She said, yes, you were. I was there. So, and I asked my mom, and she said, yeah, you were born in August. Do you think she should have told me that? And so anyway, sure enough, I was born in August, but it was because when my dad went to that line that fateful day, he remembered the date he met me. So I told you the story about he was missing in action. So he only recalls meeting me later on. So in his mind, I was born in October. So that's how I got my October. But yeah, are there any other questions? Sure. Yes. Yes, I was. I did, yes. You do have to give up your citizenship of your home country especially if you are part of a dictatorship or a communist country. You may not have dual citizenship. Countries like Great Britain, France, even Italy. I have a lot of friends who are dual citizens. India, you can have dual citizenship. Yep. Any other questions? Oh, the question was, do you have to give up your citizenship? I'm sorry. Online. Are there any other questions? Try to stop sharing. Can y'all see me now on the video? No. Oh, yes, sorry. Are there any other questions at all?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
What do you like most about living in America?
Ooh, that's a lot of things because I've been here for 46 years, or almost 47. I can tell you that I love the freedom. I love the freedom to think. I love the freedom that I can say a lot of things and not feel like I'm going to get tortured. Because my parents have told me that. When we first got here, they were very cautious. They were concerned about whether or not to talk openly about their experience. My dad looked over it to this day, 46, almost 7 years later. When he goes into a restaurant, he sits in the back with his back to the wall. Out of habit. There's been a few times where I told him, Dad, relax, and he's okay, but it's hard for him to change his MO. So freedom, I think, is, and I know that sounds trite, but it's so true. It's so true. So, any other questions online? Sure, Kathy. Kathy's question was, did my older brothers adapt as well? Because I was a baby and they were 2 and 3, almost 4. I know when you're young, they say you'll adapt, but honestly, it was my middle brother who did not adapt. In fact, even now, he's probably the one that's the most interested and tied, and I don't know what words to use to explain it, but yeah, I think a lot of it's personality too, though. But he had a really hard time adjusting to everything all through his life. So, but he's amazing. He loves my kids, and we have a great relationship. I'm very, very close to both of my brothers. In fact, my middle brother, he had a lot of challenges growing up, and he always felt like he had to prove himself because he was the middle child. And just because we were so close in age, too, we were literally a grade apart. My parents had us all back to back. And he's the only one that has 2 degrees, and he has 2 undergraduate degrees, a master's degree, and an MBA. So, and the rest of us, we don't have that many. So, the question is, where do my parents live? My parents actually live in Jackson. And I've had that question before. Why do they still live in Jackson? And why did they even go to Jackson? Because honestly, a lot of the refugees that I was telling you about, they would stop in Jackson or they'd start in small towns, but most people actually go to bigger cities. They'll go to bigger cities in California. New Orleans has a huge Vietnamese population. Jonesboro, Arkansas, Little Rock, Arkansas has a big population of Vietnamese people. Florida. My dad actually is kind of a weird egg. He's also very paranoid. He wanted his children to live in a smaller town where he could really focus on them and not feel so outward. And he also wanted to get a job where he was able to help us more than he was helping himself. A lot of, I think, refugees they felt very, they missed their homeland. So they were looking for communities that were building the culture. But like I told you, my dad actually lost his mom at a young age, and he lost his dad. So he's used to being alone. He's actually a very, very, he's an amazing man to talk to. He has very strong opinions. I'll give you that. But I think you'd have to be with his history. So, and he was also very skeptical of everything. He still kind of is. And I think that's bred of, his experience in life. He just didn't have a lot. And when he met my mom didn't actually like him. So, and she had this huge family. He had to convince her that she liked him. So, but yeah, and my mom actually had a really horrible experience, and I think that's what connected them too. I don't know if you all know, you can Google this too. But the Tet Offensive, it's actually Thut, which is the Vietnamese New Year. It was 1968. And for years and years and years, of course, the Vietnam, it was never officially declared a war, so you'll hear it being called a conflict. But it was a war because war is a war. 20 years worth of it. For years, over a decade, the North and the South always had an understanding that the Vietnamese New Year, the Lunar New Year, it was several days, about 3 to 10 days of a ceasefire. And that was, you didn't break the ceasefire. That was when people could really, Mom said that was the only time growing up that she felt safe, that she felt like she didn't have to worry about someone that was going to kidnap her, kill her, rape her, torture her, whatever. You know, my dad too, everybody that I've talked to. But that year, the North Vietnamese broke the ceasefire. They attacked the South in roughly 10 or 12 different areas in the southern parts of Vietnam, in the middle, central. But what's the terrible story that came out of that was my mother was in her late teens. She would have been 18 or 19 years old at the time. Almost 20, actually. She was almost 20 years old. I think she was 19. But she told me this story that, you know, every year that was what she looked forward to. And she was 18 and you're young and you get to do all these things and you're free. And it was the first year her mom let her actually go somewhere. So they walked to town, which is roughly 10 kilometers, which is a long way, right? And she was with a bunch of her friends. And on the way home was when the attack started. So they jumped into ditches. She hid under the dead bodies of her friends to survive. She lost all of her friends that day. And she had to carry one of her friends home because she was still alive. So it was really, I can't even begin to imagine doing that for my friends. I mean, I would do it, but I wouldn't want to. I mean, I can't even imagine why my parents aren't traumatized or have PTSD. But I think when you live a life from the time you were born and until the time that they left their country, they didn't know anything but war. They didn't know anything but surviving. So, I mean, even backfire for the first several years scared my mom and dad. That was really tough, I think, on them, is just being overwhelmed, like the whole sensory overload. My mom going to the grocery store told me there were 10 cereals. I can't, and even today she laughs when she goes down cereal. It's literally 2 entire aisles of cereal, not just 10 different ones. But she said, I didn't even know what cereal was. And, you know, tomatoes, she said tomatoes were tomatoes. So she said there was just, they didn't have grocery stores. You just went to your backyard or you went to the local market. And you went to every stall to get your food just for that day because they didn't have kitchens. So no one had kitchens. I don't know if you all know that either, but in a communist country, it's very communal, collective. So you would have, they didn't allow people to build homes, and they took kitchens out of homes if they had them. You had to go to like the communal cookhouse, and that's where they would dole out your food for you every day. And shortly after the war, it was a really tough time for my family because my mom and dad didn't actually know where their family was or where everybody ended up. And they didn't know that my parents were still alive. They thought my parents had died because we were supposed to go back. We were supposed to go, you know, be gone for a few days in hiding and come back when things kind of settled down. And somehow my mom remembered an address in the early 80s. So she actually wrote home to it was her aunt's mother, because she wanted to make sure she didn't want to send the letter directly back to her home because it would put her family in danger. And so she wrote to her aunt's mother. And she was able to get in contact with them through relatives in Canada. So I have several aunts and uncles that live in Canada. My great aunt and my great uncle also live in Canada. I'm very close to. I used to go on all my college visits, and we'd visit them in the summer when I was growing up to go to Toronto. And what I didn't know until a few weeks ago when I started this whole journey of discovery was that they wrote in code back to Vietnam because it was dangerous to write to your family, because if they found out that your family was here, they would basically just put you in prison and torture you. And it didn't matter. And I asked my dad, I said, why would they do that? Because your family members have nothing to do with it. And it literally was, 8, 5, 10 years later, and they didn't care. I mean, if they could get any information out of you and find more people, and it was a control thing, I think. So unfortunately, my uncle was imprisoned, and he was tortured for 3 years after the war because he helped other refugees get out. And he was young and not married, and so they really thought that was going to somehow make things better. But my great aunt, who my mother wrote back to her mom, they wrote in code because my dad had figured out a way to help support the family in Canada. So they had actually immigrated to Canada in the 80s, in the early 80s, but they were poor. I mean, they didn't have anything. So they didn't have some people don't have a good experience the way we did. They didn't have a church or a group of people that sponsored them. They were sponsored by the government. Sometimes that happens in other countries is you'll get sponsored by the government, but then you're just dumped out to do whatever you want to do. And so there were 4 of them, 3 brothers and a sister. And they, my dad wrote letters to them. And in the letters, he would say, oh, Phuong Lin needed 2 pencils today. And that meant $200. So they took the letter and they sent that letter back. So my dad would send the $200 to Canada to help support the Canadian family. My aunt had a bakery during the war. And she was actually imprisoned along with my uncle, my great uncle, because they were considered sympathizers because they were feeding anybody that wanted to be fed. But they were considered sympathizers because, I mean, the military base was not right next in their town. So they were basically anybody that came in and bought bakery, baked goods, they weren't just going to say no. But at the end of the war, they said, oh, well, you're a sympathizer. So they imprisoned them and tortured them. But my aunt had actually hid a bunch of money and gold and things like that it was worth money. And so she actually had money. So she would take letters from America to Canada, said, I need 2 pencils. So that's $200. They would send money from Canada, or they would write the letter to my great aunt in Canada. She would actually give the money to my grandmother to help support the family in Vietnam. So are you following my, it's very complicated. And you couldn't say I need $200 because then they would have gone after my aunt and taken everything she had. And then, yeah. And what's interesting, what's sad is that right after the war, up through the 80s even, so it wasn't until the early 90s that people had regular food and they weren't starving. And I can remember stories from my aunt in Canada, because I used to go visit all the time, but she said before, because she was actually in her late teens when she left to go to Canada. And they were attacked by pirates, on the open sea. And they made it to Canada, though, and were given refuge there. But she said that it was just horrible because for those 5 years that she was left behind, in Vietnam, she explained to me that you might not have eaten on 4 days of the 7. You were given certain days of the week that you could eat, that you could go to the cookhouse and get food. So, but they were told, things will be fine. Don't worry. Think you can go about your businesses. You can keep your businesses. But my aunt's bakery was taken away from her. She still had to work the bakery the way that she would have done it on her own, but everything she made, she had to give it to the government. And her kitchen was, they had guards all over the place that whatever she made, she couldn't hide it or, take it and feed her family. It was a very, very terrible time for all of our family. But anyway, our family ended up supporting family in Canada. The Canada family, or the Vietnam family, supported. It was kind of like a round robin. And what I didn't know too until an email this week, but my aunt in Canada told me, she said, yeah, we saved all that money and bought that. Enough for the money your dad sent us. So my dad was not only supporting his own family, starving here in America, barely surviving, he was sending money to Canada to support them because they didn't have it. And when I was in kindergarten, it's funny how you remember things as a child. I think your parents, it's not that they were trying to shelter us. It's just we have rose-colored glasses on, I think, as a child. And I remember going on these fun trips to Canada, going to the museums, going to all these fun places. And my aunt and uncle would always take us to fun places. But what I didn't know was all the reasons why we went. My dad actually scraped together enough. My aunt had told him that her older brother was going to work in a factory. And if anybody's been to Toronto in the winter, it's horrible. I mean, it's like piles of snow everywhere. He was riding his bicycle back and forth to work to support his 3 younger siblings so they could go to school because he was older. But he got into an accident and a dog attacked him. And so after that, my aunt told my mom, and my mom was very upset. She said, whatever you do, we're going to buy a car. He said, I don't have enough money for a car. What are we going to do? How are we going to get it there? So they saved up for 6 months and bought this used jalopy. And my dad was a mechanic, so he fixed it up. And we asked one of the other refugees that were living with us at the time, and he helped us drive it to Canada. And I didn't know that. I do remember the trip as a child, but I don't remember that was the reason. Are there any other questions? I could go on, so I won't. Yeah. My parents have so many stories, and I know them by heart. So, but like I said, it's not. I don't feel like it's my reality, but it is, and I don't want to ever forget them. So I'm really glad, Father, that you asked me to do this, because I've learned a lot too, and I've recorded it all now, so I have it for my children. Thank you.
Not a big picture for the care ministries. One of my dreams would be to be able to support or to sponsor a family. There's hundreds, if not thousands, looking for sponsor groups and communities and churches. And so to be able to do that, I think would just bring so much life to us. So just kind of keep that in your mind. We're looking at some ways we may be able to do that, but I'd love to be able to have our community do that. Thank you.
Layperson doing all the work. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, hey, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Thank you, Jesus, for this time together. Please open our hearts and our minds to your work in all things, little things, large things, everything, to see you in everything. And thank you for Phuong and her story and her family, and for the engaging, insightful story and life lessons. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Amen.